Hello and welcome back to my deconstruction of Nathan Hawkins' video on the case for idealism, truth, facts and existence. And let's just get right back into it. But first of all, I want to mention once again that so far, with going on 6 minutes of this 50-minute long video, he has, I wanted to actually change the setting of the video's exposure to somewhat less than what was shown. That looks a little better, right? So I'm not completely blown out. That there, as usual, I struggle to find an exception for this, right? That when people are doing something philosophical, of some kind of philosophical nature, they throw up a lot of new terms, or actual terms that are sort of confined to the area of philosophy they want to deal with, and then sort of throw them up and take it for granted that everybody understands that, but then start to qualify various terms within that set of terms, taking some of the terms for granted while explaining some other terms that apparently need some explanation or clarification, using those other terms that apparently don't need clarification, using them as an explanation or definition, or how you want to how you want to see it, right? So what I'm trying to get to is that most of these kinds of, and I'm not trying to hang Dr. Nathan Hawkins out to dry, right? But in my experience, this is just what gives philosophy a bad name, you could say, right? Like Bon Jovi saying, right? You give love a bad name, you give philosophy a bad. It's this. When people say, well, philosophy is all about definitions, what do you mean when you say that, and what do you mean? It actually is, well, it isn't really, if you really understand how to do it, in my opinion. But if you don't understand how you do it, it will strand on, what do you mean by that term? How should I understand the term, right? And it's a part of the whole training as a philosopher, as an academic philosopher. You're being force-fed, kind of. You apparently do it, at your own, voluntarily, right? But you're handed these philosophical ideas that you then you have to learn this, and this, right? And then you go to examinations in it and can, discuss various, classical philosophical arguments or standards or whatever it is, right? That then you then become a kind of, I wouldn't call it a philosopher, right? You become somebody who's versed in other people's philosophy, right? You understand that there was a philosopher 1500 years ago who said this, and another philosopher 500 years who said something fairly similar but quite different, or somewhat different, but it's the same kind of argument, but just another take on it. And you get this sort of custodian of the history of philosophy, right? In my opinion, that's not what philosophy is about. As I try to convey is that philosophy is your thinking about how you think, right? Because human beings are trained to think the way that their masters, as when they're children. They learn to think a certain way according to their peers, their masters, their parents, their peers, their schoolmasters, their teachers, priests, whoever, right? So without being able to philosophize themselves, they have been impregnated with how to understand. Philosophy is taking a stab at figuring out, whatever it is I have been force-fed during my childhood and youth, is where does that come from? You know the old story with Socrates, right? Well, where do they know it from? Well, when you dig, you don't usually have to dig very deep, right? As soon as you start to ask these kinds of philosophical questions with people, they usually very quickly get sort of defensive. And, either they get angry or they sort of try to ignore you maybe, sort of, right? And it all points to that they don't really know, they don't really have an idea where these particular ways of thinking come from. And who decided it's like habitual. It's because mommy says so, or daddy says so, or because the teacher said so, right? That's not a good philosophy, because you're basically inheriting somebody else's even shitty philosophy or even non-philosophy. Just, follow orders, right? And if you look through history, that's usually not a good idea, right? Do I need to go any deeper, right? So philosophy is about thinking about how you habitually think, and where did you get that thinking from, and is it a good kind of thinking, and so on, right? So, one thing takes the other, and you have to start with some foundational stuff and build your whole thinking and describe your thinking and categorize it and so on, in order to figure out, when I get to the point where I say I know that, what does it actually mean when I say I know it, and so on, right? Now, that is what I am proponent for, right? Of you do the thinking about your thinking. You're the only one who can do it, right? And usually the hurdle is people don't start to think about their own thinking because they're betrayed not to, in a way, implicitly or explicitly, right? So they need to somehow, by their own accord, figure out that they actually need to do some thinking about how they think. And then when they realize that, what are they going to do if they realize it? Which is fairly uncommon, I would say, right? What do they do? It's like it's a completely uncharted territory they are in, right? They don't know what they're doing, basically, if they start to philosophize, right? So what do? They read some philosophy. They grab some Nietzsche. They grab some Plato. They grab some Camus or whatever, right? And they say, oh, that sounds like something I like. And then they sort of go into a, ex post facto justification. This is where I'm usually thinking, and I'm finding some philosophy that, falls in line with what I'm already thinking. That could be sort of religious or mystic or, whatever, right? At what point do people get to the point where they say, I have to do it everything. I have to do that kind of thinking myself. I can get inspiration from somewhere else. For instance, Nathanhawkins, right? Or whoever, right? But at the end of the day, I have to do everything myself. I have to come up with a reduction base. I have to come up with definitions. I have to come up with all the axioms and so on. Metaphysics, if that's necessary, right? Definitions of knowledge, definitions of truth, and whatever you need. I'm not saying you necessarily need that, but if you need it, you have to do it. And how about a moral principle, right? Nobody has ever come up with anything. Some people have come up with something, but it has been scrutinized to not be particularly useful, right? At the end of the day, when you look at the sort of history of philosophy, there is no consensus about anything, right? Not that there necessarily have to be, but I think a lot of people who are not doing any philosophy think that these things have actually been settled. But when I sort of figure out I need to do some philosophy, right? I was kind of baffled at the lack of settlement in philosophy. Nothing seems to be settled. Nobody could tell me what truth is. Nobody could tell me what knowledge is. Nobody could tell me what a moral principle, what kind of moral principle that, it was like, yeah, somebody says this, somebody says that, some says this and some said that, okay, and then it all points actually, at the end of the day, to you have to do it yourself, right? You have to do it for you. You have to do it for you, so that you have a philosophy. If I could sort of convince the world about that, I would have come a long way in my personal opinion, right? And I would be happy to sit down most of the day listening to other people presenting their philosophy on their YouTube channels. Excuse me, or wherever they sit on TikTok or wherever, right? And Rumble and whatever. And listen, say, I've come up with this, and I might say, that's kind of strange that maybe I would make a deconstruction video. Or I might say, wow, I never thought of that. That's very great, right? Rather than all these trained academics who are just custodians of philosophical history, right? Do it yourself, man. Okay, let's kick it. Kick in. Head in.
Now, when we say that propositions are the meanings of sentences, we need to be a little bit careful, because they're not the meanings of all sentences. Some sentences are used just to express emotions, like, hooray for absolute philosophy! And others are used to make requests, like, please hit like and subscribe to my channel. Sentences like this don't have meanings that can be true or false, so they can't mean a proposition. Meanings that are true or false are the meanings of descriptive sentences.
No. They can't be. No, that's why we need to be very sharp here, right? You can't look at a sentence and say that is a true sentence. All sentences are true. I mean, what would it even? You can't say all sentences are true, but you can't categorize sentences by this is a sentence that can be true and this is a sentence that can't be true. It's not the sentence that is true. Strictly speaking, in my opinion, it is whether or not you take the sentence and compare it to your experience, and if it's in agreement or in concordance with it, what's the term? In alignment with it, then it's the propositional part of the sentence is true. But for it to be able to be true, it has to address that experience. If there's nothing in the sentence that addresses something you can compare it to, it's the experience that guides you towards whether or not that sentence is a proposition. So there's something about the experience that needs to be addressed in that sentence in order for it to be a proposition. And if it's a proposition, then it can be either true or false. Otherwise, it's not a proposition. But it's not because the sentence can be true or false. It's because the content of the sentence addresses a particular aspect of your experience that can, and that would be knowledge, in my opinion, right? Because that elephant I'm pointing to, I know that elephant because I have, it sort of hangs together, right? It's my experience. It's a particular cognition of my experience. That cognition is a fact to me. Therefore, but I call that knowledge because it's something that can be either or, right? It's either there or it's not there, right? And because it's either there or not there, it can be proposed, right? I'm not saying, it's sort of a 50% elephant or something like that, right? That wouldn't work, right? So it have to be binary. It's either an elephant or not an elephant. Either I experience elephant or I don't experience elephant, right? So it's either true or false. It's binary. It has to be binary. It can't be 80% true and 20% false, right? And that's why cognitions work perfectly for this, right? Knowledge has to be either, let's say, 100% known or 0% known, right? You can't say I'm almost knowing it. Either you know it or you don't know it, right? Otherwise, personally, it wouldn't work for me, right? And you would open the floodgates of all sorts of manipulation, right? So, therefore, cognitions like elephant, for instance, right, work perfectly as a definition of knowledge, in my opinion, right? So, I'm handing you my philosophy, right? And if I propose elephant, or somebody else propose elephant, it's so easy for me to say, look in that direction, true or false, right? It's not more complicated than that. It's actually quite simple. I think it has become very complicated because people want to bring all sorts of shit in that cannot be proposed, but they would very much like to be able to be true, because it's sort of a blue stamping of, hey, the theory of gravity is true, right? It's like saying, okay, you have to obey it or something like that, right? But it's not something that can, to stay with your term, it's not a truth carrier, right? Or truth bearer, right? It doesn't bear any truth. It can't bear truth because it's not something that can be cognized, in my opinion. And another way to classify what you mean by knowing is that if something can be known, it must be known by an individual, right? Knowledge is not something that can sort of travel into your mind and say, oh my God, I just received some knowledge here, right? That would be that would be misguided, in my opinion. So there has to be an experience already there present that you have to classify as knowledge. And you have to be able to know it. Everybody who potentially can access some kind of knowledge has to access it firsthand. Otherwise you would have to ask somebody, right? And why would you have to ask somebody? Why would they be special carrier of knowledge? Everybody should be able to, unless there's some completely mental clusterfuck, right? So everybody should be able to have access to knowledge. Well, wouldn't that be obvious to say it's the cognitions or the concepts like elephant, right? So I know elephant. And when somebody make a proposition, I compare that proposition and the pointing to that thing over there, that's an elephant. Proposition, right? Because it addresses something that has already been classified as knowledge. That's what a proposition do. I propose what I know, right? Isn't that what we are basically trying to do, right? I propose yellow. All right, but what do I need that for, right? But it's more interesting if it's a tiger, right? Look, tiger in the living room, right? Like, holy shit, man, right? Look, brown in the living room. It doesn't carry the same kind of importance or urgency, right? So it makes very much sense to me to make cognitions knowledge. Okay, that's a lot of my philosophy there, right?
Sentences that are used to describe the way things are. Sentences like, the sky is blue. So from now on, when I'm talking about sentences, I only mean to refer to descriptive ones. Okay, let's quickly assess.
Oh, descriptive. Okay, but if I say, oh, my stomach hurts, I'm describing my stomach, ain't I? Or at least some kind of pain. Isn't that descriptive? But can it be true? Well, it depends on whether or not a pain can be a cognition, in my opinion. I don't think it can, because it's more like an internal feeling, right? And if it's internal to me, nobody else can really observe it. So it doesn't make sense to call it knowledge in the sense of knowledge. Knowledge should also be that which can be objectified, right? It can be two or more subjects agreeing upon an object. Like elephant, right?
That's where we've come. If propositions are our truth bearers, they have to be the meanings of our sentences, the things that we say, and the contents of our beliefs. But then, what are propositions? What are meanings? Most importantly for our discussion, are meanings abstract entities, mental entities, or physical ones?
So now it compounds, right? So now we're talking about three new things: abstract entities, mental entities, physical entities, right? One thing takes the other here, right? But it is kind of annoying that, and it's a prime example of midstream philosophy. In my opinion, the most complex part of your philosophy should be in the beginning. And then it should be actually become more and more and more simple. But when you're doing midstream philosophy, it's usually the other way. Well, it's like, let me talk about Aristotle and truth. And all of a sudden it compounds into, now we have this long list and, abstract entities that I can add to the, sorry about the, let me see if I can find it here, right? Hang on. Entities can be either abstract, mental, physical. So now we have, facts, things, world, mind, reality, existence, truth, thought, certainty, theories, belief, saying, a view, and entities, right? And some combination of the facts are true thoughts. And truth bearers are must be true thought, must be fact bearers. Then if true thoughts are, if facts are true thoughts, then truth bearers must be bearing facts, right? So facts are the things that can be true. So now, right, it almost sounds circular, right? So what about these truth bearers and truth makers? And maybe it comes later in this presentation, right? And also this about truth being sort of correspondence theory. I don't like theory in philosophy, right? Because it has nothing to do. So now they're entities, right? What's the difference between an entity and a thing and a fact and an existence? It seems if these are four completely different categories with no overlapping, it sounds weird that because a thing and a fact and an entity, they must have some overlapping, right? So
abstract entities, mental entities, or physical ones. Interestingly, two great philosophers, Gottlob Frege and Bertrand Russell,
there they are. Bertrand Russell, right? It's the fairy tale story that all these British philosophy students, they're handed this story about Wittgenstein talking to Russell and Russell coming up with a definition of this, and then Frege said, or was it Frege came up with an idea of a new logic or whatever, and then Russell read it and found an error, and Frege was up in arms and spent another 5 years writing.
Had a discussion about this in some letters they sent to each other, the implications of which are quite staggering. Frege thought that meaning had two aspects to it, sense and reference. I've done a full video on Frege's influential theory about this in the card above me and linked in the description. But for our current purposes, what's important is that Frege thought it was the sense of a sentence that could be true or false, what he called the thought the sentence expressed. Physical objects, Frege said, could be referred to by the names in the sentence.
Yes.
So they weren't part of the sentence's sense. They weren't part of the thought. As he says to Russell in his letter, Mont Blanc, with all its snowfields, is not itself a component part of the thought that Mont Blanc is more than 4,000 metres high. Russell's view at the time was very different to Frege's. He didn't think that meanings of sentences. Russell's view component part of...
No, but that's just, he has read somewhere that Mont Blanc is 4,000 meters high. I suppose he hasn't measured it himself, right? And he didn't come up with a standard called a meter, right? Well, how does he know there are snowfields on it if he's sitting there in his living room? He's not experiencing snowfields, right? So he is tapping into an already settled story that he's working from, that if I could express myself, that he considers knowledge. This is what is known about Mont Blanc, right? Hang on, I have to adjust the lighting. Mont Blanc, right? These are just claims, unfounded, I suppose, right? Unless he's sitting out there looking at Mont Blanc and say, there are snowfields there, right? He doesn't know that. He doesn't even know there's Mont Blanc if he's sitting, 500 kilometers away from Mont Blanc. Or whatever, right? It's these settled stories about what exists that people want to make sure is kept apart as an unchanging story about a reality, because of psychology of, well, I have to keep thinking that the Eiffel Tower is in Paris. I can't go there every hour and check whether it's there, so I have to pretend that it's there, right? I have to convince myself I'm okay with it being there. But that doesn't make it knowledge, right? Or that doesn't make me saying anything about the Eiffel Tower a proposition, because I'm not experiencing Eiffel Tower, right? So it's this about direct experiences that they have to settle. That's why these people, they're tapping into, they have been trained to think about a story about reality as it is. He has been told there's something called Mont Blanc. He has been told there's snowfields on it, and he has been told it's 4,000 meters high. He considers that knowledge. So when he says Mont Blanc with its snowfields is 4,000 meters high, he thinks he is proposing something. He's not, because he's not, I would suggest, not experiencing that which he is proposing, right? So it's not a proposition. And 4,000 meters, in my opinion, cannot be a proposition, because it's not a concept. It's not a fact, right? To me, 4,000 meters is not a fact. A fact is something that is or isn't, right? A fact is an elephant, for instance. Either it's an elephant or it's not an elephant. Or either the elephant is there or it isn't there, right? But 4,000 meters is not either there or not there, right? It can't be a fact. It can be a claim about some, quantification of distances or something like that, right? And because all these aspects of science and so on have been taking over the idea of what it means to know and what it means to be a fact, pushing good philosophy aside, everybody seems to be completely confused about these things. It doesn't mean that you can't say, in my opinion, that Mont Blanc, if I can find it, I would find it to be 4,000 meters high. Fine, if you want to believe that and go with that, that's purely up to you, right? I'm not saying you can't do that. I can't say you can't expect there to be snowfields on Mont Blanc, but you can't propose it. Well, you can propose it. But if you're proposing and I'm not experiencing Mont Blanc, I say, I don't know, right? You can make the proposition, I suppose, right? But if you were pointing and say, look, Mont Blanc, and I'm sitting here in Denmark, right? Look, Mont Blanc has snowfields. I would say, what? I mean, I can't see any Mont Blanc anywhere, right? You're fucking crazy. So, well, enough of that.
The thought that Mont Blanc is more than 4,000 meters high. Russell's view at the time was very different to Frege's. He didn't think that meanings of sentences came in two varieties. He thought there was only one meaning, and that was the proposition. And he thought that propositions were made of things in the world itself. He writes in reply, I believe that in spite of all its snowfields, Mont Blanc itself is a component part of what is actually asserted in the proposition Mont Blanc is more than 4,000 meters high. We do not assert the thought, we assert the object of the thought. And this is, to my mind, a certain complex, an objective proposition, one might say, in which Mont Blanc is itself a component part. If we do not admit this, then we get the conclusion that we know nothing at all about Mont Blanc itself. So Russell thinks that the meaning of the sentence Mont Blanc is more than 4,000 meters high includes, among other things, Mont Blanc itself, the alpine mountain with all its snowfields. If Russell is right about this, then propositions are mind-independent complexes that include physical objects.
Yeah, but what would it even mean to be mind-independent? But how can you make a claim or statement about anything that would be independent of your mind? Because you wouldn't be aware of it, and you are appealing to some external world that you haven't qualified, right? Independent, as I mean, what would it mean to be independent? It must be outside your experiences, then, right? If you have this bubble that is your experience, then that must exist outside your experience. But how can you propose anything about it if you don't have access to it? So yeah, I don't want to go too deep into that discussion with these two old philosophers, right? I think I've said it sufficient so far to address what I mean by where I'm coming from with propositions.
In which case, truth bearers would also be mind-independent complexes, including physical objects.
Well, what? I never understood this thing when people say mind-independent. Does it mean that when I'm experiencing elephant and turn around, the elephant must still be there, even if I'm not experiencing it? Is that what they mean by mind-independent? Because then it's not completely independent, is it? Because I'm working from a memory of that elephant then, right? If you don't experience an elephant, but you have a memory of, you just experienced elephant, then you're working from the memory of it. So it cannot be completely mind-independent, can it? It's dependent on something. And if it's not dependent on your mind, what are you doing then? I mean, it's sort of a dysfunctional. It's a mind independent. It's like, if I can't see it, I can't touch it, I can't anything. It's completely independent. I have no access to it. I mean, why the fuck would I care? I mean, it's like, right? It's kind of weird.
Part of what made Russell adopt this view, as he admits in his letter, is that he believed a view like Frege's, that had thoughts as the truth bearers, might lead us to conclude that we know nothing at all about objects in the world themselves. A position that he subsequently feared might eventually lead to idealism. Now, this correspondence between Frege and Russell took place...
Oh, I need a sip of my very strong coffee now. Might lead to idealism. Okay, this is not a good argument for jumping into idealism, in my opinion, right? You have to address it another way, I would say. Because you're talking about aspects that are not really significant to whether or not it's idealism or some other metaphysics, right? Or ontology, as Bernardo Kastrup calls it, which is a misnomer in my opinion. But what you are proposing must be an experience. Why would you start proposing if you're not experiencing that which you are proposing, right? At least you are experiencing a memory of Mont Blanc, right? And you have read somewhere in your memory of Mont Blanc and a picture you saw in a book, and you read 4,000 meters and so on, you can regurgitate that which you associate with that idea called Mont Blanc. And you could say that's a proposition. Okay, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't say it's a proposition. But you are still referring something that is dependent on your mind, which is your idea of what you have read, or what you have been told, or what you might have a memory of, right? In my opinion, the only time you can get to a true proposition is if you propose something you are experiencing at the same time in a cognitive fashion, not in a memory, not as a idea from a book, right? You don't know, I don't know Eiffel Tower at this point because I am not experiencing Eiffel Tower, right? If I would point and say that's Eiffel Tower, I would have to say that's false proposition because I'm pointing to a yellow house outside my window, right? If I said the Eiffel Tower is brown, would that be a proposition? I would say that brown is not a cognition. That's a qualia, which is something that is responsible for you making the cognition of, for instance, Eiffel Tower. But if I'm not cognizing Eiffel Tower at the moment, I cannot tell you what color it is because somebody might have, made it yellow overnight, right? I mean, so I have to experience the shit I'm talking about. Otherwise, forget about these propositions, right?
In 1904, Frege never abandoned his theory, but Russell did. By 1910, Russell's view had changed dramatically, and it changed again in 1912, and again in 1913, and again in 1918, and by 1919, Russell finally gave up the possibility of finding a suitable theory that had physical objects as parts of propositions. Now, I won't bore you with all the details of the various...
Really? No, I'm no expert in Bertrand Russell. I'll immediately admit that. Is it really that difficult? Isn't it because there are so many things that these philosophers needed to be propositional? Because they needed the story about what you can know and what you can propose to be much larger than it possibly should be, right? How could he, I mean, if you could get around your everyday and find food and find your toilet and shit, right? if you do all these sort of various things on the everyday basis without even giving it a second thought, how can you not propose something then? Right? Is it because it has been blown out of the water somehow, right? And I get sort of very light here, right? So maybe I should turn it into a automatic adjustment. Let me see. No, that didn't help. Light. No. Okay, I'm sorry about that. It's an old, it's an old webcam, right? How far did I get? Yeah, it convolutes philosophical discourse because people are midstream philosophizing and they have already preconceived ideas about where the conclusions should lead. And they can't fit the things together. Well, duh, right? And you're standing there in the middle of the stream and you can't navigate, right? Because you're not starting at the starting point and planning out ahead and all that, right? It's a lack of foundational thinking that makes people run into all these sorts of disconnected thoughts about philosophy, in my opinion.
Problems Russell came up with when trying to establish a theory of this sort. But one of the major problems he had is quite intuitive and easy to grasp and is also quite instructive. It seems clear that some sentences, such as "the moon is made of cheese," are perfectly meaningful and yet also clearly false. So there must be false propositions as well as true ones.
How do you know? Hang on. Let's take that one again.
Is also quite instructive. It seems clear that some sentences, such as "the moon is made of cheese," are perfectly meaningful and yet also clearly false.
No, but is cheese something that can be proposed? Right? You have to define what you entail in a proposition. Maybe I'm a little premature here in his. Sorry about this webcam. I'm sitting sort of halfway in direct sunlight, and it changes. And when I try to make it automatic adjustment, it just blows everything out. So sorry about that. Okay, if there's a picture of me, I would I would like it to be viewable, right? The moon is made of cheese. No, maybe it's not cheese that can be proposed. Maybe it's moon that can be proposed, right? It doesn't matter if it's made of cheese or not. And you would have to go to the fucking moon to check whether it's cheese, right? So if you say to me, the moon is made of cheese, well, I don't know, right? I'm not tasting the moon at the moment, right? And I'm not even experiencing moon. So I have no clue about this, right? But apparently everybody seems to know that the moon is not made of cheese, so it's a false proposition. How do they know that? No, it sounds ridiculous, I would agree. But that doesn't mean it has sort of jumped into a false proposition just because it sounds ridiculous. There are a lot of things that sound ridiculous that are actually possibly true, right?
So there must be false propositions as well as true ones. But if...
No. Again, that is the point of my approach to this, right? My approach is it's always a comparison between the sentence and your experience. There are no propositions that are always false or always true. It depends on the experience you're comparing it to, right? If you're saying that's cheese, and I look and I see a cheese, it's true, right? That's moon. I look and I experience moon. I say it's true, that is moon, right? I might say it is false if I think, that's not a moon, that's a paper moon, that's a fake moon or something. That's not, it resembles moon, but it's not an actual moon, right? So I say it's false. It depends on the subject participating in this scenario, right? There's nobody from up on high that says, the moon is not made of cheese. It has been settled, right? The Eiffel Tower exists. It has been settled.
If propositions contain real-world, mind-independent complexes, then what are false propositions? They would also be mind-independent.
Yeah, but then it's misguided, right? Because a proposition, when I say it's a false or true proposition, I'm actually twisting the words around a bit. It's the comparison between the proposition and the experience, but you don't make the comparison before you make the proposition. As soon as you make the proposition and you compare it to the experience, you say that proposition is false or true because you needed to do that comparison when the proposition arrived. And then you attach the true or false to the proposition. But that doesn't mean that's the proposition that is sort of, now it has been settled. This proposition is true. Well, if the elephant disappears, that true proposition is all of a sudden a false proposition, right? Compared to the actual state of my experiences.
Dependent complexes consisting of objects, properties, and relations. In which case, what distinguishes true propositions from false ones? They both would be mind-independent complexes of objects, properties, and relations, in which case false propositions sound an awful lot like facts. And that's bad. Nobody wants it to be a fact that the moon is made of cheese. Since Russell had such a hard time making a theory of this sort work, despite his many attempts, let's just rule out the possibility of propositions being physical entities. That leaves us with the other two options. Maybe propositions are abstract entities, like numbers or mathematical sets. Those that take that view are called Platonists about propositions. Alternatively, perhaps propositions are mental entities, like thought.
No, but if you agree with your partner, you have a wedding ring there, right? And you say, let's go eat some dinner, right? And you go to the refrigerator to extract some edible stuff, right? You don't start to talk about numbers, right? Yeah, okay, should I take 4 or 5 apples, right? But you cognize shit. You look, there's the chicken, there's the salad, there's the kale, there's the juice, there's the yogurt, right? You cognize shit, and you propose that is the, is this the yogurt, right? Is this the yogurt you want? And your partner looks, yes, that's the true proposition. This is the yogurt we want. You're not going to say, no, I'm a Platonist. This is 33. Is this 33 you want?
Thoughts or ideas. Those that take that option are called conceptualists about propositions. Platonists present an argument that says that propositions cannot be mental entities. Take a proposition like 2 + 2 is 4. This proposition would be true, they say.
It's not a proposition! It's not a proposition! It's not a proposition, right? You're not experiencing 2 + 2 is 4. It's like, oh look, 2 + 2 is 4 is over there, right? I guess it has to do with how you define what you're talking about when you're talking about propositions. But it doesn't make sense to me it seems like all sorts of things that could possibly be proposed is still hiding in language here, right? You have to settle, in my opinion, some kind of experience as that which can be proposed. Otherwise, it's not. And now my webcam is going completely. I'm sick and tired of this webcam. Let me see if I can. Maybe I should. And this is fully automated, and it looks awful, right? So I have to do something about it like this, right? Okay, so I'll have to work with it as it is there, right? So we have to get on with it. What is it? No, it moves. It's this bloody webcam, right? How far did I get? I'll just rewind a bit and get inspired.
2 is 4.
Yeah.
This proposition.
Sorry, I can't be bothered. Right? Let's just carry on without the. Let me just make one final adjustment on this stupid camera, right? Okay. That numbers are abstractions, right? It's correct according to 2 + 2 is correct according to the standard of counting and adding, right? It's not a proposition because you're not referring to anything, right? You are tapping into a system of counting and adding and doing it supposedly correct according to that, agreed upon standard called adding and counting. That's not a proposition, right? If you say 2 + 2 is 5, it's not false. It's just incorrect according to the standard of counting, right? And it is this also I addressed in the first video. When you start to mix the categories, right? The moon is made of cheese is a different category than 2 + 2 = 4. I mean, if you see that as the same category, we are not on the same page, right? And it's this sort of mixing of categories without any scrutiny. I am a little worried about, right? It's no wonder they're confused. No wonder they're confused, man, right? So I would, sorry about this bloody webcam, right? I would like to change the white balance. somewhat. Let's save it there, right? Okay. Let's hear Nathan.
Position would be true, they say, even if there were no minds. This is an argument from possibility, and an argument from considerations of time suggests something similar.
But it's a mind that came up with the idea of counting, right? So they were counting before there were any minds? And these philosophers, man, right?
Consider when the universe was first coming into being. Presumably at that time there were no minds. But 2 plus 2 was still 4, right? I mean, if 2 planets form from dust clouds one moment and another 2 planets form from dust clouds the next...
Yeah, but then you're cognizing here. Yeah, but no. Why do I need to bring stuff or things into it? This bloody fucking video cameraman, right? Now I turned yellow, right? I have to fix the settings on that one, right? Damn. This is completely ridiculous, man, right? It's incredible. Okay. There's something you can cognize there, so you can count it. You can't count anything without being able to cognize it. And furthermore, you need to cognize some identical concept like planet. And there has to be a planet there, point there, and point there, and point there, and point there. You can't experience 2 plus 2 without addressing some kind of cognition. That's why I'm saying propositions about these cognitions, not 2 plus 2, right? That's just some mental gymnastics you do when you have cognized these important aspects, right? That's what you can propose. You can propose, say, that's a planet, that's a planet, that's a planet, and that's a planet. That's the proposition.
There would be 4 planets. So, if propositions can be true without minds, the Platonist argues they must exist without minds too, in which case they cannot be mental entities. Now, I think the Platonist has a good point here about the eternal nature of truths and the necessary nature of some truths, but I don't find their conclusion very compelling. It just seems obvious to me that since the Platonist agrees that propositions are the contents of my beliefs, the contents of my thinking, and what I comprehend and understand when hearing a sentence, these must be mental entities of a sort. How can what I'm thinking not be best understood as a thought? In which case, it should best be understood also as...
Yeah, but a thought is just an abstraction, an abstract label you attach to that. You're not experiencing thought. You're having an experience. You then classify as a thought. Right? That's why I'm very adamant about you have to focus on the direct experience, not all these categories you create afterwards, or all these systems like mathematics, or an idea of a Big Bang or whatever, right? These are abstractions based on some kind of cognitions. Those cognitions are what you can know and propose. And from that you can deduce all sorts of shit like theory of gravity or the idea of mathematics, right? Or the idea of a thought or an idea of a mind, right?
As a mental entity. In reply to the Platonist's argument, I would say that either it is not possible for there to be no mind because there is eternally and necessarily some mind, or it is possible for there to be no mind, but in such a case there would be no propositions either. In any case, the Platonist has their own difficulties to contend with. One involves explaining how it is we can come to know about these mind-independent abstract entities that we can't perceive. If there is no mechanism by which they can interact with our mind, how is it that we're able to grasp them? Another issue.
Who says they're there, right? Just because somebody says there's something beyond my mind I can't get to, but they're fooling you then, right? They're gaslighting you. It's a metaphysical gaslighting of some kind. That doesn't work, right? Be careful with this these weird claims.
Concerns the identity and properties of these supposed objects. Since they are, by hypothesis, mind-independent, we have no reason to associate them with the content they produce in our mind when we grasp them. And there are several suitable candidates for what these objects might be, yet they can't all be those objects without contradiction. And we're left with no principled way of deciding which object is which proposition. And yet a principle of individuation...
Okay, he's lost me now. I'm sorry, but I can't comment on this because I'm lost. But now we are talking about identities, right? We're also talking about knowledge. Knowledge, identity.
Is typically thought...
abstract entities. Yeah, I'm moving this around a bit. I think I'll put this one here. All right.
To be necessary for any independent objects. In short, Platonism has problems both technical and epistemic. For now, let's put the Platonist option to the side and pick up the views of Frege, who believes, like me, that truth-bearers are thoughts. Does that mean that Frege is a conceptualist?
No, but what is it that you treat thoughts as a kind of part of an ontology? It seems like you're presented it as if truth is something that emerges somehow, or appears somehow, or arrives somehow, and therefore it becomes true because it bears the truth. No, it's kind of an abstraction, you could say. I would say the only way you can get it to work using truth is to say, if I propose that which I'm experiencing, I can call that true when I compare the proposition to my experience. But it's a particular kind of experience. It's not the color of the elephant I propose. It's the elephant as a concept or a cognition that I propose. That is what can be proposed, nothing else. And the comparison, as I say, between the experience of elephant and what is proposed in that proposition, the cognitive content of the proposition, which could be, for instance, that's an elephant, then elephant, and therefore true. If elephant and no elephant, then false. If either of them doesn't concord to the other. If you don't experience elephant, but there's elephant in the proposition, it's false, right? And if there's elephant in your experience, but there's not elephant in the proposition is also false, right? Maybe I think so, right? But maybe you need to analyze it a bit, right? But it's because that there's all sorts of other shit that people want to be able to propose, right? Maybe it's from some kind of authoritarian ideal. And therefore they can't square this circle.
Yes, but his conceptualism is of a specific kind and needs some nuance. Frege believed, as the Platonist does, that there can be truth-bearers that no one ever thinks or says. And he believes that the things that are true eternally. In fact...
Okay, now we lost it, right? Now he's religious. Something similar, right? Eternal truths? Give me a break, man. It's like there are... It's sort of... I guess it's a kind of... What would that be? An authoritarian ideal of... This is... No, more blank. is Mont Blanc and it's more than 4,000 and it has snow, right? That's an eternal truth. You dare not, right, be in doubt about this because my teacher told me, right? That's not going to fly.
In fact, Frege believed that thoughts themselves were eternal, and that when we think them, we merely come into a certain relationship with them by grasping them with our mind. Frege argues for this view by pointing out that the things we believe and say aren't private parts of our psychology. They are fundamentally public entities capturable in language.
What?
They're the things that we can communicate to each other, we can disagree about, and teach to our children. Further, when we discover a new truth, say by proving a new theorem of mathematics, Frege thinks this is a process of discovery. The theorem always was true, it's just that now we have managed to grasp that thought and recognize its truth. Since thoughts are public, discoverable but invisible entities, Frege distinguishes them from two other kinds of things. First, there are the private inner psychological goings-on of our mind, which he calls ideas, and then there is the world of external objects presented by our senses. In contrast to this...
Okay, let's take a stab at this one. The private inner realm and the public realm of the senses. What is public realm? Public realm? Well, if I'm outside you, then I'm a part of that public realm. Then my private inner realm is all of a sudden a part of the public, or what? Now we're going into this sort of Bernardo Kastrup's, dissociations or something like that. It's approaching that, right? The realm of the senses, physical entities. This is a materialist approach, right? Well, how does he know about this? If his private inner realm is this is physicalism. Right? This is a physicalist approach. I have some concepts in me, but it's representing all that which is outside me. But what you're basically saying then is, I'm experiencing elephant, and that elephant is outside my experiences. Or something along those lines, right? It might not be elephant, it might be something else. I'm experiencing red. That red is outside my experiences. Well, you can't get around your experience. You can't get out of your experience. Because what are you referring to? It's an abstraction you're referring to. You're saying, I have some experiences of which there's something beyond. But you're not experiencing any beyond, right? You have your experiences. The beyond part is something you added as an abstraction, as an idea. But it doesn't make it so just because you have that abstract idea. It's the, how do you get from I have experiences to there is something beyond my experiences? Please give me that argument. I've been asking for that argument for years now. Nobody seems to. They just take that external world for granted, just like he writes here. It's incredible, right? When you think about it.
These, Frege says that thoughts exist within a third realm, a realm of external but imperceptible objects. For an example of how this works, imagine that I say to you that horses are beautiful creatures. Perhaps when I said that, in my mind I pictured a black stallion galloping through a field. And when you heard it, you imagined a white mare gently grazing. The stallion and the mare are what are private to us. They are our private inner ideas. But what was publicly communicated when I said that was the thought that horses are beautiful creatures. According to Frege, the thought and ideas exist in different realms. And both of these realms are again different to the physical horses grazing in the paddock. From what I said so far, Frege might seem like a confused kind of Platonist, using the word thoughts to refer to what are ultimately mind-independent abstract entities in a third realm. But I think that's wrong, and a small remark he makes presents us with a very intriguing alternative. He says that although thoughts are not the contents of consciousness owned by individual men, they could be understood as the contents of the mind, not of minds. I think this remark is very telling.
Well, what is mind? What is it? I mean, it's again, that's why we need this foundational philosophy, because if you dig down and find a reduction base and say, okay, this is the starting point of my philosophy, fine. And then you rebuild all of that which you are experiencing and need to, get to, like epistemology, whatever, right? And at some point you get to the definition mind, if you need that definition. Then I would know what you mean by mind, because that definition has to be based on the philosophy that came prior to you adding that new term to your philosophy. Then I would be hopefully fully understanding. I might not agree with you, but at least I would understand where you're coming from. This sort of mind just appears, right? I don't like when terms just appear out of nowhere, even if I've heard the terms a lot of times before, right? That's why I try to keep count of all these terms that are being brought into this presentation, right? Facts, things, world, mind, reality, existence, truth, thoughts, certainty, theories, belief, saying, knowledge, identity, and entities, right? That's a hell of a lot of shit, right? And I feel I'm only more confused about what we're doing so far, and this is going on 20 minutes. I don't feel enlightened, right? What I think he's trying to do is just like Bernardo Kastrup does, which is, okay, let me start out by pointing these 4 or 5 kinds of philosophies that has flaws in them, right? That is bad philosophy. And there's another one there, it's also bad because of this. And there's a third one that is also bad because of that. And therefore, my philosophy, right? Okay, we are past the 1 hour mark here, right? So should we, I don't know how much time I need to dig into this. Maybe let's keep going a little more.
It paints a picture of Frege distinguishing between the private contents of our individual minds and the publicly accessible mind in which we all participate through the use of our reason and language.
I don't like this public mind or collective mind, all this shit. I get very strong mystic communist, maybe I don't want to add that politics to it, right? But it's just around the corner, right? We all in this together. You're just an insignificant part of a bigger mind that is... get the fuck out of my face, right?
Ideas are in our individual minds, while thoughts are in the mind. And since thoughts are eternal, this mind must itself...
Since they are eternal... Well, who says? He just claims they are internal. What does that mean, that they are eternal? No. I'm not buying any of that, right? No. It's like... when they sort of... I think there's a tendency that they start out gentle, these philosophers, and also 100 and 150 years ago. They start out gently, and when they then can't penetrate and get to a settlement that's fairly simple, then they go all in on it's eternal, it's everywhere, it's okay, hold your horses, mate, right? It is sort of, well, I have to do it, it's everywhere. Okay, so now you can't avoid it, right?
Also be eternal. And if that was a remarkable thing to say, Frege also says something remarkable about facts. Facts, 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 cries the scientist if he wants to bring home the necessity of a firm foundation for science. What is a fact? A fact is a thought that is true. So Frege thinks that facts are true thoughts. And if true thoughts are in the mind, then facts must be in the mind as well.
Now it starts to become some kind of... It starts to sound like they're synonymous. Fact and true and thought seems to be the same thing. It's just the same word used in different contexts or something like that. Is it really that difficult, man? Right?
If he's right about this, and I think he is, then facts are mental entities.
I think that he is, but give me an argument. Connect the dots for me. I think it is. I mean, connect the dots, right? Give me an example of a true thought. Right? A thought is a thought. It doesn't make it true, because true is some kind of abstraction. Right? It's not something it is. You can't say that this mouse I'm sitting with on my computer, this is true. It's a fucking mouse, right? Isn't it enough to say it's a mouse? Why do I need to say it's true? Well, if I propose it's a mouse, then I want to compare my experience of it with the proposition. Otherwise, why the hell would I make a proposition? And why would I need truth? I need all of that, right? I just do my thing with my mouse here, right?
Facts are thoughts in the eternal public mind. Now, I don't want to give the impression that I'm arguing that Frege is an idealist. There are philosophers who point to idealist elements in his thinking, and I agree with them. But the prevailing view is that Frege is a realist, because he believed in reference and in objects presented to our senses. And although I have a lot to say...
Object presented to our senses? But you... No, now you're a materialist. You don't get it, do you? Right? Your senses are also experiences of something that is potentially, if you go with an external world, before you experience it, that could be responsible for your experience, called senses. But that experience itself is not the sense. What you could refer to as an I, for instance, is not the actual I that is responsible for your representation of the I. Right? That's the problem of materialism. So if you say there's an external world, and there's an I out there, that what you're referring to is not that experience you call I. That is something else then. It's not the experience of it, because that experience has then to be somehow derived from that which arrives from that I. But the I is, your experience is the mental representation of whatever is out there that you don't have access to, right?
Say about matters of Phrygian interpretation, I even did my PhD thesis on the topic. That's not my intention here, so I'll resist the urge to get distracted. My point in bringing up Frege was to show that the belief that facts are true thoughts has some weighty precedent. There are few philosophers as insightful and respected as Frege, so the view should not be dismissed lightly. But this video...
Oh yes, there's a lot of people who like Frege, so you can't dismiss it because, bandwagon argument, right? Give me a break.
Video is not a simple appeal to authority, no matter how weighty that authority may be. So I first need to argue against the alternative views before I return to Frege's one and develop it further. For now, let's take what we've discussed as giving us good reasons to think that truth-bearers are thoughts. And let's now turn our attention to the other important entities, the truth makers.
Okay, let's stop here. The truth... Now, this is very too much complication, unnecessary complication. And it also seems it jumps from one term to the next term, to the next term, to the next term, right? What about this world he's talked about in the 20 minutes ago? He's not talked about world since then, right? And reality? There's no mention of reality anywhere now, right? There might have been, I overlooked. But, it's like, it's polemic. It's like I would like to make a video where I sound like I have been studying philosophy and heard about Frege and Russell and Wittgenstein, because that's what all curriculum of British philosophy, right? So I'm very hands down or hands-on kind of philosopher who's sort of skeptical when it becomes all about words and terms and so on. I don't care about the words exactly, right? Because when I stand on the refrigerator, I don't need words. I need my cognitions and my experiences to get around in my refrigerator, right? I don't care if it's the truth makers and truth carriers and whatever, right? I'm experiencing my tomato, right? I want my tomato, then I cognize tomato and I slice up my tomato. I shove it in my throat and I, chew on it and taste tomato and say, yeah, that tastes like a tomato, right? Why do I need all this complication here in order to get around in my refrigerator, right? And if I don't need it to get around in my refrigerator, why do I need it then? Because I find it more important that I can find my way around my refrigerator than I can find my way around this video here. And that's one of the points I'm trying to convey through this deconstruction, is that it seems to be more about this polemicness than actual getting to something that is functional in your everyday. Because in your everyday, that's where you're living, right? You're not living in frege's, Mont Blanc world, right? Okay, see you in the next one.